Michael Lombardi. I don't know if we've really talked about him too much on this podcast, Reese, but kind of a notable Bears hater, Trubisky hater. Someone who worked as a GM for the Browns for 1 year and has kind of gotten a lot of, clout from that. He came out and he said that the Bears have too much to lose by not starting Nick Foles. And that was his big statement. So it was headlined everywhere. And again, he is kind of a Trubisky hater. I used to listen to one of his podcasts. He was on the NFL podcast, I believe, a while. Or he would at least show up on the shows and he would talk, and he always had really negative views on Trubisky. And I'm going to be honest with you, didn't make sense, some of the things that he would say about Trubisky. And it made me kind of think that he wasn't really watching him or didn't really have, a stance to formulate an opinion on as much as he'd like other people to perceive he did. But not to, slam his credibility, because every argument is valid here, especially. I get what he's saying, but he is also the man who drafted Barkevious Mingo for the Browns, current Bears edge rusher. And he was kind of he wasn't that good of a GM, Barkevious Mingo, obviously one of the top busts in the NFL, someone who was drafted extremely high. I think he was like the 3rd overall pick or 6th overall pick, somewhere up there. And he's kind of, with Michael Lombardi, at least he's kind of really built a lot of his credibility off of just people he's worked with, which are like Bill Walsh, Bill Belichick. He obviously has a much more extensive NFL resume than myself or you, Reese. That being said, I don't know if I buy that the Bears have too much to lose by not starting Nick Foles. I would argue that it's the opposite. I think that if Nick Foles wins it out, the Bears, I think that if Trubisky wins, the Bears are going to kind of look a little bit stupid for bringing in Nick Foles. I mean, they traded a 4th-round pick for him. They gave him, a decent amount of salary cap. And he's on a decent contract with us. He's not going anywhere for the next couple of years. Ultimately, I think that Ryan Pace would much rather start Trubisky than Nick Foles.
Yeah, I think that, I agree with you. I mean, what the Bears have to lose most by starting Trubisky over Foles, or not starting Foles, and to word it a different way, is games.
Yeah, right.
That's the worst thing they could lose, is some games. And, honestly, I mean, you and I have been calling for the Bears to draft a quarterback. That only helps our case in that instance, I'm not saying the Bears should go out here and tank. I think they have a much, their roster is too good to go out there and do that. That being said, the biggest question mark is still at the quarterback position, and will be until we really see something to prove it. But we know what Nick Foles is. We've seen what he has been for the majority of his career. Obviously, he went out there and won a Super Bowl, but at the same time, he's never someone that's had amazing success being, a starting quarterback. I mean, he did well with his first stint in Philly under Chip Kelly, I believe. Or maybe even Andy Reid was still the coach at that point. I don't know.
It was Andy Reid.
Way early on. I mean, he did well. He had a great touchdown interception ratio. But then, since then, we pretty much know what Nick Foles is. And, the only person we really kind of still need to learn more about is Trubisky, because we've seen him play really good in flashes, and we've seen him, struggle at times. And, if we take 2018 compared to 2019, it almost seems like you're watching two different people play. So, if the Bears are able to tighten up, give him a better offensive line, you might as well throw Trubisky out there, see how he can manage. And I think Foles serves as a good backstop. I mean, if Trubisky doesn't play well, then you put Foles in there in a couple weeks' time. But I don't know. I don't agree with that statement at all.
At this point, I kind of think that it's about a 50-50 likelihood as to who's going to start for starting QB for us, because I see all the reasons why they would want to start Trubisky, but I also see all the reasons why they would want to start Nick Foles. I mean, you look at the coaching staff, it's like pretty much tailor-made for Nick Foles. Like every single person from the top down has experience with him. He knows the system extremely well. I could see it go either way. If Trubisky does become the backup, I think Ryan Pace has the most. I'm going to be honest. If we want to look at the Bears, there's different, there's kind of a different, there's like a split in what's better for the GM and the head coach. Kind of a principal agent problem, if you will, for anyone that's kind of into business stuff. But essentially, for Ryan Pace, I feel like the best thing would be for Mitchell Trubisky to win that starting job. But for Matt Nagy, I believe the best thing for him is for Nick Foles to win that starting job, because then we'll be able to see how Matt Nagy's system is enacted fully when the quarterback has experience with it. When the quarterback is, at least an okay quarterback, it's really going to tell about Matt Nagy. Whereas Trubisky says a lot more, Ryan Pace. And maybe if Trubisky isn't performing well, Ryan Pace can Matt Nagy can kind of scapegoat through that. And maybe Ryan Pace, he couldn't, you know what I'm saying? So there's a little bit of some issues regarding what's best for each, the head coach and the GM, but luckily it seems like Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, they always talk about how they're not ego guys and they're not going to let what's best for them impact the team. So I don't foresee that causing any sort of rift between the organization. And ultimately, I think that it's really hard to say. I'm leaning towards Trubisky right now, and I think you are too, Reese.
Yes, I've been leaning Trubisky. I feel pretty strongly, actually, that it'll be Trubisky at this point. You bring up a great point, though. I feel like Nagy, and they may say to the media, they may say that, they're not ego guys, but in reality, it's just a human thing to kind of look out for your own job, per se. So I'm sure, Pace in the back of his mind is really pulling for Trubisky, and he may not want to make that public or really make that obvious, but I'm sure he has his stake with Trubisky, and Nagy wants probably Foles because it's more of the sure thing. Like you said, he can fully put his offense into use, so I'm sure he feels that way too. In reality, now who haven't we talked about? I mean, of course we haven't talked about all the assistant coaches and them and all that. We haven't talked about the players, though, and who the players want. And it's been interesting to watch that over the course of the offseason. I think like Tariq Cohen has showed up, like the likes of Tariq Cohen has showed up on like First Take. I feel like Allen Robinson has done plenty of interviews. There's been quite a few Bears players that have asked the question, because it's the obvious. It's the big question that's sitting out there. It's like, do you trust Trubisky to be your quarterback? Do you think Trubisky will be starting? And it seems like, at least, to the media, a lot of the players have hope with Trubisky. It wasn't too long ago, I know that, Trubisky was throwing passes around to Anthony Miller. I feel like the players are just more used to Trubisky in a way and almost have a little bit more comfort with him. Now, that could be totally off base. That could be totally wrong. And that could be change. That could change over the course of training camp for sure. Nick Foles could get some solid reps out there with the guys, and the players change their minds. But I feel like almost too, I think around the team really kind of wants to see Mitch, given another shot. I think they believe in him, so it's just a matter of Mitchell Trubisky proving them right.
And I think that Trubisky might have a little bit of an unfair advantage over Nick Foles when it comes to what the players want, because he has been with the players. And if you watch Mitch Trubisky's press conferences and everything, he's a very likable person. He's a very likable quarterback. He puts a lot on himself. And it's really hard not to root for him as an individual, because he's a really hardworking person. It seems like he really, really wants this thing to work out. And I think the players probably see that in the locker room and they really appreciate it. And players really haven't been able to, know Nick Foles, get to know him, see how he is. They haven't really had any experience. Maybe that's where it's coming from. But also on the other hand of it, if the players really thought that Mitchell Trubisky, especially like, Tariq Cohen or Allen Robinson or whatever, or, Ted Ginn Jr., if they really thought that Mitchell Trubisky was that bad of a quarterback, they would probably want just some sort of change there, because of the whole, their production, revolves around him. The team winning revolves around him in a way. So it's a sticky situation, and it's going to be one that's really interesting to watch as a Bears fan. It seems like a lot of people, as soon as we went for Nick Foles, they were extremely interested in just handing him over the job. And that's actually the next topic we're going to get into. So why do people just hand Nick Foles the starting job, right? And my own personal opinion on this, Trubisky, he's definitely performed not as well as we would have wanted to, but I think that people specifically like to target Trubisky because they like to believe that Trubisky is the sole reason for the Bears' issues in offensive production last year, which just isn't the case. And I think that anyone who really realize and watches a lot of football, they realize that yes, the quarterback is the most important position, but I mean, look at solid quarterbacks like Matt Ryan or Matthew Stafford, right? They're two quarterbacks who are, decent quarterbacks, better than Trubisky at the moment, but they also have had a lot of crappy teams around them, and thus it's really limited some of their production. And I definitely think that Nick Foles has a higher floor than Trubisky. But if we're talking about like looking for a player that will really change our team, that is solely in the hands of Trubisky. Trubisky taking a step up is by far the most important thing that could happen to this Bears team and the number one thing that could actually lead us to winning a Super Bowl. Right? Trubisky just having a breakout season is the one thing that the Bears could really ride the wave on, right? The entire team is ready for a quarterback like that. And, say what you want about Trubisky. And I know, Reese, you and I, we've been extremely critical of him this entire offseason. Last offseason, we were more appreciative of him. We were even saying that he's, a little bit underrated by a lot of people and that he should be considered, I think we said like a top 15 quarterback, which, looking back at that, that's a really bad take. But in the moment, he looked like he was primed to break out. He had a good season. But here, I'll tell you these two things about Trubisky. There's two things that people kind of don't really know about him. One, he's not as bad as the national media makes him out to be. I mean, if you talk about why they do it too, it's kind of I feel like it's kind of to prove themselves right. Like everyone, when they saw the Bears trade up for Mitchell Trubisky, they instantly were betting on him, performing horribly, and they wanted him to perform horribly. And if you also look at the Mahomes storyline and the fact that they skipped out on Mahomes and Watson, it just kind of enhances that storyline the worse that Trubisky is. So it's definitely beneficial for, people in national media to kind of hate on Trubisky and try to, prop themselves up and everything like that. And the second thing, though, is that Trubisky has an extremely high ceiling, right? As far as like a traits perspective goes, he's got all of them when he's on. When he's on and when he's, reading defenses as well and everything, he is very accurate, okay? He is extremely mobile. He has a really good arm. He's got everything. He can make the fast decisions. He has different type of ball trajectories that he's able to, use. He can manipulate safeties with his eyes when he's on, especially when he faces man coverage. I mean, just look at the Detroit Lions games. Look at games against teams who use primarily man coverage. He's been stellar against them. It's the zone coverage. It's this tricky defensive coordinators that really make him fold. So if he could just change that mental aspect of his play and get more consistent with his mechanics and just improve in like these areas that are very improvable, then he can be a damn good quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the national media criticism goes, and people automatically assuming that Nick Foles will get the job, it's because people like to rip on the Chicago Bears because, frankly, this team does not have a good history at quarterbacks. Jay Cutler holds just about all the records passing. He took those all from Sid Luckman, someone that was playing before just about anyone that's probably listening to this was born. So those were records from a long, long time ago. And even when Jay Cutler was here, who's arguably this team's best quarterback and statistically is definitely this franchise's best quarterback, people had so much criticism for him, both nationally and locally, for what he did. The quarterback position just comes with a large amount of criticism. Mm-hmm. Look, with Mitchell Trubisky, he has been scapegoated 100%. You're right. Last year, there's a bad offensive line. That doesn't help at all. And then in his second year, he had a new coach, a new offensive coordinator. And then his rookie season, he had John Fox and that whole
which I don't blame him whatsoever for.
No good wide receivers. He didn't have a chance to succeed. Not a chance in hell. At the same time, there were definitely moments last year where Mitchell Trubisky did cost the team games. Where if he just played at an average level, if he made some simple passes, if he had some decent decision making, the team would have won more games. It probably would have been a playoff team. Like you said,
Almost
there was
certainly.
like a couple games. They win the game against the Chargers. They win the game against the Eagles, which they probably should have won.
The Packers week 1, the Packers the second time we played them. 2 close games where if we had a little bit better quarterback play, we would have smoked the Packers.
Yeah. So that easily makes the Bears a playoff team last year. Now, with that being said, I think that the national media, when the Bears decided to go get Nick Foles, I think they just kind of saw that as that Foles was literally a decent enough candidate. They felt that like he would automatically just take the position from Trubisky. That like the Bears team would just automatically throw all their support behind him because that's just how much the Bears had outed Trubisky. And I think that the national media didn't really kind of quite understand what was going on here. I know Pace and other members of the Bears have kind of been wishy-washy on exactly what they're going to do with Mitch. I know I think it was early on in January of this year, so January 2020. Pace said Mitch is our quarterback and he's going to be starting like next year. And then it's a couple months later they go out and get Nick Foles and everyone's kind of like, well, what the hell is going on here? And I think that was right before the draft, so there was a lot of build, a lot of buzz, and I think people are kind of getting, okay, Nick Foles is going to be the starting quarterback. Now, I mean, with kind of the way this offseason has been, and, you can go back and listen to our podcast, the narrative has changed quite a bit, where, we didn't get the workouts that we usually had, no mini camp and all that, and it kind of seemed like, to me, that really helped edge Trubisky back in, and it seems like, Foles wasn't really quite able to build that rapport with a lot of the players early on like he maybe would have had the chance if there were OTAs, if there were other drills. And, Trubisky just kind of holds in favor because he's been around, he's been used to it, the players know him, and, he maybe is still more of that leader figure. So I think that, the people initially had the change would have changed their minds like we did. I think we thought that Foles was a shoo-in as well. But with the way this offseason has gone on, now what we addressed earlier on in this podcast, it seems like Trubisky is probably the stronger candidate, or in your words, it's a 50-50 toss-up.
And I am going to disagree with you slightly in the fact that I don't necessarily believe this offseason was an advantage for Nick Foles. What I think is the advantage for Trubisky...
Not to cut you off, I was saying it was an advantage for Trubisky. That's all.
Okay, yeah. No, I'm sorry. I misspoke. I think it's more of an advantage for Nick Foles because of the fact that he knows the offense. So I mean, it's kind of a toss up because Trubisky knows the players, Foles knows the offense, right? So Trubisky's not going to have as much time to go through offensive plays in the offseason, whereas Nick Foles will probably know these plays like the back of his hand already. Whereas Trubisky, though, will know his receivers really well, and Foles will have almost no idea about that currently. So my opinion is that it's easier to get used to players than it is to a scheme. So I almost view that this might be actually an advantage for Nick Foles. What I think really helped Trubisky, a couple of things. Which I'm kind of, pissed about, if I'm being honest. There's no national media at these practices. There's no national media at training camp. We couldn't go and see what each quarterback looks like. Right? So it kind of removes a lot of pressure off of him and a pressure on Ryan Pace or Matt Nagy to say that Nick Foles is the backup or whatever. So, because if it was like last season where we were getting notifications that he was throwing picks once a day at least, which is what was happening these past 2 years, fans would have been very upset. There would be a lot of questions about it. And if Mitch was handed the job, then there would have been a huge criticism over Ryan Pace and Matt Nagy, even though they probably want him to work out more than anything else. So I think that is kind of what helps him a little bit. Ultimately, though, I mean, again, it's just 50-50. If Trubisky is actually improving and he walks into the Bears facility and everyone's like, wow, he is playing, he looks like a different player. The way the ball leaves his hand looks different. He's worked on his footwork extensively. If all that is true and mentally he's there, yeah, give Trubisky the starting job. Let's see what he can do on the field. But at this point, I really don't know. We've heard this whole hype about Trubisky last year, and maybe it's unfair for me to use that against him because it seems like it is slightly different this year, and it seems like he actually was really pressing on improving. But at the end of the day, we've seen this before and it didn't work out for us. And that's why I think it's a 50-50. Nick Foles definitely has the advantage when it comes to the playbook.
What I'll say is, if the advantage that Nick Foles has is the scheme, and look, I know that Foles has been playing a lot longer than Trubisky has, but Trubisky, this will be his third year under this scheme. Yeah, coordinators have changed around a little bit, but this is largely Matt Nagy's offense. If he still doesn't understand it, he's doomed. I mean, he's doomed. If he really doesn't understand this playbook still, I mean, come on. You can't cover that up for him anymore. I know that last year they really stripped that playbook back a lot for him. And there was a lot going on with him mentally that really impacted, his footwork and his mechanics even so much. He was just frazzled come the end of last year.
Seems like it.
But yeah, if it's still to the point with this whole offseason, if Trubisky should have just been spending, not only working on his footwork, improving and trying to improve his knowledge of the game, but if he doesn't know Nagy's playbook inside and out by now, then he's doomed. I'm sorry, I just can't even cover for him anymore.
Yeah, no. Hey guys, like our video, subscribe, and check out our bi-weekly podcasts on Apple Podcasts. Thanks.